My name is Emma, and I need to tell you about the woman who changed everything before I ever knew her name was Zoe. It started 3 months ago on a Tuesday night in October. I remember because I'd been working late on a project proposal, the kind that makes your eyes burn from staring at screens too long. When I finally collapsed into bed around midnight, exhaustion should have granted me dreamless sleep. Instead, I found myself standing in a library I'd never visited. The shelves stretched impossibly high, filled with books whose titles shifted when I tried to read them. Dust motes danced in shafts of golden afternoon light that streamed through tall windows. And there, between the stacks, stood a woman with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a cream-colored sweater that looked soft enough to sink into. She turned toward me, and I saw her face for the first time. Angular cheekbones, full lips curved in the beginning of a smile, and eyes the color of storm clouds. When our gazes met, something electric passed between us, a recognition that made no sense. I'd never seen this person before, yet every cell in my body insisted otherwise. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I woke with a gasp, my apartment dark and silent around me. The dream clung to me like morning fog, refusing to dissipate even as I showered and dressed for work. All day I caught myself thinking about those storm-gray eyes, wondering why a figment of my imagination felt more real than most people I actually knew. The second dream came 4 nights later. This time we were walking along a beach at sunset, our bare feet leaving parallel tracks in wet sand. She wore a flowing sundress that caught the breeze, and when she laughed at something I couldn't remember saying, the sound was like music I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. In this dream, I was brave enough to reach for her hand. Her fingers interlaced with mine as naturally as breathing, warm and slightly calloused in a way that suggested she worked with her hands. We walked in comfortable silence, watching waves roll endlessly toward shore, and I felt more at peace than I had in years. Again, I woke before anything significant happened, but the feeling of her hand in mine lingered for hours. I found myself flexing my fingers throughout the day, trying to recapture that phantom touch. By the 3rd week, the dreams were coming every few nights. Each one more vivid than the last, more emotionally intense. We met in different places each time. A bookstore where she recommended novels I'd never heard of but somehow knew I'd love, a park where we fed ducks while discussing philosophy and art, a kitchen where she taught me to make bread from scratch while flour dusted her cheeks. The strangest part wasn't the dreams themselves but how real they felt. Most dreams fade quickly upon waking, becoming fragmented memories that slip away like water through cupped hands. These remained crystal clear, playing in my mind with perfect clarity days later. I could still taste the bread we'd baked together, still feel the warmth of her laugh against my ear when she whispered jokes during our imagined conversations. I started keeping a dream journal, something I'd never done before. Every morning, I'd write down every detail I could remember, what she wore, how she moved, the way her nose crinkled when she found something amusing. The journal filled quickly with pages of careful observations about this mysterious woman who was becoming more familiar to me than most of my actual friends. The dreams evolved, becoming longer and more intricate. We had entire conversations about books and music, shared stories about our childhoods, debated whether aliens existed while lying on our backs in imagined meadows. I learned she loved thunderstorms and old movies, that she bit her lower lip when concentrating, that she had a scar on her left palm from a childhood accident involving a neighbor's fence. None of it should have felt real. Dreams don't work that way. They're usually nonsensical jumbles of daily experiences and subconscious fears. But these felt like memories of events that had actually happened, relationships I'd actually lived. When I woke each morning, I experienced a profound sense of loss, as if I'd been torn away from someone important. The frequency increased. Every other night, then every night. I found myself looking forward to sleep with an anticipation I hadn't felt since childhood Christmas mornings. My waking hours became a countdown to when I could see her again, this phantom woman who was becoming the most significant relationship in my life, despite existing only in my unconscious mind. Friends started commenting on my distraction. Sarah mentioned I seemed different, more thoughtful maybe, but also somehow absent even when physically present. My sister called to check on me after I forgot our weekly phone date for the second time. I made excuses, claiming work stress or seasonal changes, but the truth was simpler and more impossible to explain. I was falling in love with someone who didn't exist. At least I thought she didn't exist. The most unsettling aspect was how familiar she felt. Not like someone I'd met briefly and forgotten, but like someone who'd been part of my life for years. In dreams, I knew her preferences, her mannerisms, her expressions. I could predict how she'd react to jokes or how she'd comfort me when imagined troubles arose. This deep knowledge felt impossible, yet it was undeniably there. I began researching dream psychology, reading about recurring dreams and their potential meanings. Most sources suggested they represented unresolved issues or desires, symbolic representations of things we needed to address in our waking lives. But none of the explanations felt adequate. This wasn't symbolic, it was specific, detailed, consistent in ways that defied typical dream logic. The woman had a name in my dreams, though I could never quite hear it clearly. It started with a Z sound, that much I was certain of. Sometimes she'd introduce herself to imagined strangers, or I'd call out to her across dream distances, but the name always seemed muffled, as if heard through water or from far away. 2 months in, the dreams began affecting my daily life in unexpected ways. I'd walk into bookstores and gravitate toward sections she'd shown me in sleep. I'd hear songs on the radio that reminded me of melodies she'd hummed while we cooked together in my subconscious kitchen. Once, I found myself at the grocery store buying ingredients for a recipe I'd never made, only to realize later it was something we'd prepared together in a dream. The emotional impact intensified as well. I'd wake some mornings with tears on my cheeks, having dreamed of conversations where she comforted me through fears I hadn't even admitted to myself while awake. Other nights brought dreams of such joy and contentment that reality felt gray in comparison. I was living 2 lives, one mundane and solitary, the other filled with a connection so profound it made my chest ache with longing. My therapist, whom I'd started seeing for entirely different reasons the year before, listened patiently as I described the situation. She offered rational explanations about the mind's ability to create detailed narratives, about how loneliness could manifest in psychologically complex ways. But even she seemed puzzled by the consistency and emotional intensity one described. I tried everything to understand what was happening. Meditation before sleep, hoping to gain some control over the dreams. Keeping detailed records of my daily activities to see if anything might be triggering these specific visions. I even attempted lucid dreaming techniques, thinking that if I could become conscious within the dreams, I might gain insight into their origin or meaning. Nothing worked. The dreams continued with their own logic, their own timeline. I remained a participant rather than a director, experiencing each encounter as if it were happening to me rather than being created by me. This lack of control was both frustrating and oddly reassuring. If I couldn't manipulate these dreams, then perhaps they weren't entirely products of my own imagination. By month 3, I was having the dream almost every night. They'd grown more intimate, not sexually, though there was definitely an undercurrent of attraction, but emotionally. We shared deeper conversations, more personal revelations. In dreams, she knew about my childhood fear of dark water, my complicated relationship with my parents, my secret desire to write novels instead of marketing copy. I knew about her struggles with perfectionism, her love for her grandmother's garden, her dream of traveling to places where she could see the aurora borealis. The woman felt like home in a way I'd never experienced with any actual person. Being with her, even in sleep, was effortless. No need to perform or pretend, no walking on eggshells or second-guessing my words. With her, I was simply myself, perhaps the most authentic version of myself I'd ever been. But it was also becoming torture. Every morning meant losing her again, returning to a world where she didn't exist except in my memory. I'd reach for her in that drowsy space between sleep and waking, only to find empty sheets and the cold reality of solitude. Some days, the grief of these repeated losses felt overwhelming. I started wondering about my sanity. Was this level of emotional investment in a dream figure healthy? Was I avoiding real relationships by pouring all my romantic energy into this impossible connection? My friends' concerns about my distraction began to feel more legitimate. Maybe I was becoming too isolated, too caught up in a fantasy that was preventing me from engaging with actual life. But then I'd have another dream and all those concerns would melt away. The connection felt too real, too important to dismiss as mere fantasy. Whatever was happening to me, it was significant in ways I couldn't yet understand but didn't want to lose. The dreams began to change in subtle ways as I approached the 3-month mark. Instead of meeting in random locations, we often found ourselves in the same place, a small apartment with hardwood floors and plants on every windowsill. It felt like her apartment, though she never explicitly said so. I knew where everything was located, could navigate the space in darkness. The familiarity was both comforting and deeply strange. In these recent dreams, there was an urgency that hadn't been present before. She seemed to be trying to tell me something important, though her words always became unclear when she reached the crucial point. She'd take my hands, look directly into my eyes with an intensity that felt almost desperate, and begin speaking about something vital. But just as I'd lean in to catch every word, I'd wake, leaving me with the maddening sense that I'd missed something crucial. 3 nights before everything changed, I had the most vivid dream yet. We were standing in that familiar apartment, rain pattering against windows while she made tea in her small kitchen. She was wearing jeans and an oversized gray sweatshirt, her dark hair loose around her shoulders for once instead of pulled back. She looked tired, as if she hadn't been sleeping well. She handed me a mug of chamomile tea and sat beside me on her couch, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, something with lavender and honey. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain, and I felt that familiar sense of rightness, of being exactly where I belonged. Then she turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, nervous, hopeful, determined all at once. "Emma," she said, and it was the first time I'd heard my name spoken clearly in any of these dreams. "I need to tell you something important. Something that might sound impossible, but I need you to listen." My dream self leaned forward eagerly, knowing this was the moment I'd been unconsciously waiting for. But just as she opened her mouth to continue, my alarm clock jolted me awake, and I nearly screamed with frustration. The next 2 nights brought no dreams at all, which was somehow worse than waking at crucial moments. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, missing her with an intensity that felt like grief. Had I imagined the urgency in her expression? Was my subconscious finally releasing its hold on this elaborate fantasy? But on the 3rd night she came back, and this time the dream was different from all the others. We were sitting on a bench in a park I recognized, not from previous dreams but from real life. It was Washington Square Park, just a few blocks from my actual apartment. The recognition sent a shock through my dream self. All our previous meeting places had been generic, invented spaces. This was real, specific, a place I could visit while awake. She was wearing the same gray sweatshirt from the rain dream, but now she looked excited rather than tired. Her eyes were bright with anticipation as she turned to face me fully. "Tomorrow," she said, and her voice was clearer than it had ever been before. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. by the fountain. You'll understand everything then." I tried to ask what she meant, but she was already fading, the dream dissolving even as I reached for her. I woke with my heart racing and the absolute conviction that this hadn't been like the other dreams. This had been a message, an instruction, a promise. For the first time in 3 months, I had somewhere specific to be. The day that would change everything started like any other, except for the electric anticipation that had been humming under my skin since the park dream. I'd barely slept after waking from that final vision, my mind spinning with possibilities and doubts in equal measure. Was I really considering going to Washington Square Park because a dream woman had told me to? It sounded ridiculous in the harsh light of morning, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. I went through my usual routine, shower, breakfast, checking emails, but everything felt surreal, as if I were performing normal actions while floating slightly outside my own body. The woman's words echoed in my mind. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. by the fountain. You'll understand everything then." The certainty in her voice had been unlike anything from previous dreams. By noon, I'd given up pretending I wouldn't go. I changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a blue sweater that had always been one of my favorites. As I walked toward the park, I couldn't decide if I was hoping to find her there or hoping to find nothing, proving once and for all that I'd been living in an elaborate fantasy. The November air was crisp, carrying the last hints of autumn before winter settled in completely. Washington Square Park was moderately busy for a Thursday afternoon. Students from nearby NYU, dog walkers, the usual collection of chess players and street performers. The fountain at the center wasn't running, but people still gathered around it, using the circular bench as a meeting spot. I arrived at 1:45. Partly because I'm always early and partly because nervous energy had made staying in my apartment impossible. I found a spot on the bench where I could see most of the surrounding area, and tried to look casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. The rational part of my mind kept up a steady commentary about how this was silly, how dreams don't predict reality, how I was setting myself up for disappointment. But underneath that logical voice was something stronger, a certainty that had been building for months. Whatever was happening to me, it was real in ways that transcended normal explanation. At exactly 2 p.m. I saw her. She was walking from the direction of the arch, wearing jeans and that same gray sweatshirt from my recent dreams. Her dark hair was pulled back in the messy bun I'd seen so many times before, and even from a distance I recognized the way she moved, purposeful but unhurried, with a slight bounce in her step that suggested barely contained energy. My breath caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. People don't walk out of dreams into reality. Yet there she was, scanning the area around the fountain with an expression of nervous hope that mirrored exactly how I felt. Our eyes met across the space, and the world seemed to pause. The recognition was immediate and mutual. Her face lit up with a smile of pure joy and relief that told me she'd been experiencing something similar to what I'd been going through. She raised her hand in a small wave, and I found myself standing and walking toward her without any conscious decision to move. We met in the middle of the path, stopping just a few feet apart. Up close, she was exactly as I'd dreamed her. The storm-gray eyes, the scar on her left palm that I somehow knew would be there, the way her nose crinkled slightly when she smiled. But she was also more real than any dream could capture. I could see the individual strands of hair that had escaped her bun, the small freckle near her left ear, the way her cheeks were flushed from the cold air. "You're here," she said, and her voice was the same one I'd been hearing in sleep for 3 months, but with new dimensions, a slight raspiness, a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "You're real," I replied, which wasn't exactly what I'd meant to say but summed up my amazement perfectly. She laughed, and the sound was exactly right, exactly as I remembered it, but richer somehow. "I was starting to wonder if you were real. I'm Zoe, by the way. Though I think you already knew that." Zoe. The name I'd been trying to hear clearly for so long, and now it fit perfectly, like finding the last piece of a puzzle I'd been working on for months. "Emma," I said automatically, then felt foolish. "But you know that too, don't you?" Instead of answering directly, she tilted her head and studied my face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but wasn't. This is going to sound completely insane, but I've been dreaming about you for months. Detailed, vivid dreams where we talked and spent time together. Dreams that felt more real than most of my waking life. The relief that flooded through me was so strong I almost laughed out loud. 3 months, I said. Every few nights at first, then almost every night. Dreams where we knew each other, where we were... I paused, not sure how to finish that sentence. Close, she supplied. Where we were close in ways that made no sense because we'd never actually met. We stood there grinning at each other like idiots, both of us clearly thrilled to discover we weren't going crazy alone. Other park visitors flowed around us, but they might as well have been invisible. The only thing that mattered was this moment of mutual recognition, of shared impossible experience finally being validated. This is completely bizarre, Zoe said, though she was still smiling. I mean, what are the odds? How does something like this even happen? I have no idea, I admitted, but I'm so glad it did. There was a pause where we both seemed to realize we were standing in the middle of a public park having a conversation that belonged in a science fiction novel. Zoe glanced around, then looked back at me with raised eyebrows. "Wanna go somewhere we can talk properly? I have about 1,000 questions, and I'm guessing you do too." I nodded eagerly. We ended up at a small restaurant a few blocks away, claiming a corner booth where we could speak without being overheard. As we walked there, I kept stealing glances at her, still hardly believing she was real and walking beside me. The dreams had prepared me for her appearance, but not for the way she moved through space, the way she paused to let a dog walker pass, the way she unconsciously tucked that escaped strand of hair behind her ear. Over the next 3 hours, we compared notes, and the similarities were both thrilling and unsettling. Our dreams had followed remarkably parallel tracks, the same increasing frequency, the same emotional intensity, the same sense of deep familiarity despite never having met. We'd dreamed of many of the same locations, though we'd experienced them from different perspectives. The apartment with hardwood floors and plants everywhere? That was Zoe's actual apartment, though she'd never shown me around it in the dreams. The bookstore where she'd recommended novels? A place she'd worked during graduate school, though it had closed 2 years ago. The beach where we'd walked at sunset was from her childhood vacations with her family in Maine. "What about the library?" I asked. "The first place I saw you, with the impossibly tall shelves?" Her eyes widened. "That's the research library at my university. I spend a lot of time there for my dissertation work. You were standing between the literature and philosophy sections." I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. "I remember those sections specifically, but I've never been to your university. I don't even know which university you attend." "Columbia," she said. "I'm getting my PhD in art history." "What do you do?" "Marketing copy for a small firm. Nothing nearly as impressive as a PhD." She shook her head. "It's not about impressive. It's about the fact that somehow you dreamed about a place you've never been, with details accurate enough that I recognized the description immediately." We continued trading stories, each revelation more impossible than the last. I dreamed of her childhood bedroom, complete with a specific poster of a painting by Georgia O'Keeffe that she confirmed had hung there for years. She dreamed of cooking with me in my actual kitchen, despite never having seen it, and she described my apartment layout with perfect accuracy. "How long have you lived in New York?" she asked at one point. 2 years. I moved here from Portland for the job. What about you? 4 years, but I grew up here. Upper West Side. She paused, stirring her tea thoughtfully. I've been trying to figure out if we might have crossed paths before, if maybe we saw each other somewhere and our subconscious minds latched onto it. But I don't think that's what this is. No, I agreed. This feels bigger than that. More intentional somehow, if that makes sense. She nodded emphatically. Like we were supposed to find each other, and dreaming was just the way it happened. As afternoon stretched toward evening, I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't in months. Talking with Zoe was exactly like the conversations we'd had in dreams, easy, natural, filled with tangents and discoveries. But it was also better because it was real, because I could see the way her eyes lit up when she got excited about a topic, because I could hear the full richness of her laugh instead of just the dream version. "Can I ask you something potentially awkward?" she said as we shared a piece of chocolate cake neither of us had really wanted but had ordered to justify staying longer. After the day we've had, I think awkward questions are allowed. In the dreams, did you ever feel? She paused, searching for words. I mean, there was definitely a connection between us that felt like more than friendship. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I met her eyes. Yes. Definitely yes. Not just attraction, though there was that too. Something deeper. Like we were meant to be together in some way. Relief flooded her expression. I was worried I was projecting that onto the situation because I wanted it to be there. But you felt it too. I fell in love with you before I knew you existed, I said, then immediately felt exposed for admitting something so intense. Sorry, that sounds perfect, she interrupted. It sounds perfect because I fell in love with you too. We sat with that admission for a moment, both of us probably marveling at how we'd gone from strangers to love confessions in the space of a few hours. But it didn't feel fast or crazy. It felt like acknowledging something that had been true for months. So where does this leave us? I asked eventually. I mean, we have this incredible connection, but it was built in dreams. What happens now that we're both awake? Zoe reached across the table and took my hand, and the touch was exactly as I remembered from sleep, warm, slightly calloused, perfect fit with my own fingers. Now we find out if what we built in dreams can exist in reality, she said. We take it slow, get to know each other in the waking world, see if this connection is as strong as it feels. And if it is? She squeezed my hand gently. Then we'll have the most unique origin story of any couple in history. We exchanged phone numbers before parting ways, both of us reluctant to end this miraculous day but understanding that we needed time to process everything that had happened. As I walked home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The woman from my dreams was real, she'd been experiencing the same impossible connection, and she was just as interested in exploring what this meant as I was. But the day had one more surprise waiting for me. That night, for the first time in 3 months, I didn't dream of Zoe at all. Instead, I slept deeply and peacefully, waking refreshed in a way I hadn't experienced since this whole journey began. It was as if the dreams had been leading us toward that meeting, and now that we'd found each other in the waking world, they were no longer necessary. The realization filled me with both relief and a strange sort of mourning. Those dreams had been the most significant relationship of my life for months. Now they'd served their purpose and ended, leaving me with something even better. A real woman with whom I could build a real relationship, but one founded on the most extraordinary beginning either of us could have imagined. I texted Zoe as soon as I was fully awake. "Did you dream last night?" Her response came within minutes. "No dreams at all. Just the best night's sleep I've had in months." "You?" "Same. I think the dreams were trying to bring us together, and now that we've met, their job is done," she finished. "Want to get breakfast and talk about how bizarre and wonderful our lives have become." An hour later, we were sitting in a small diner near Columbia, comparing notes on our dreamless night and marveling at how natural it felt to be together in daylight. If anything, the connection between us seemed stronger than it had in dreams. Without the ethereal quality of sleep, our attraction was more grounded but no less intense. "I have a confession," Zoe said over scrambled eggs. "Yesterday, when I saw you walking toward me in the park, I had this moment of panic. What if you weren't as amazing in person as you'd been in dreams? What if the connection didn't translate to reality? And now, she smiled, and I felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest. Now I think the dreams were just a preview. The real thing is so much better. We spent the morning walking around her neighborhood, and I was struck by how easy everything felt. Conversation flowed naturally, silences were comfortable, and when she linked her arm through mine as we crossed the street, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The next few weeks passed in a blur of discovery and deepening connection. We saw each other almost daily, exploring the city together and finding new ways to connect. Every date revealed more layers to the person I'd fallen in love with in dreams, and each revelation only made me more certain that what we had was extraordinary. There were practical things to navigate, of course. Zoe was finishing her dissertation and had a demanding schedule. I was dealing with a major project at work that required long hours. But somehow we made it work, carving out time for each other that became the highlight of both our days. The physical attraction I'd felt in dreams translated perfectly to reality. Our first kiss, 2 weeks after meeting, was both familiar and entirely new. I'd kissed her countless times in sleep, but the reality was warmer, more complex, filled with small details dreams couldn't capture. The softness of her lips, the way she tasted faintly of the mint tea she'd been drinking, the small sound she made when I tangled my fingers in her hair. But perhaps the most remarkable thing was how the emotional intimacy we'd built in dreams became the foundation for something even deeper. We already knew each other's fears and dreams, had already shared our most important stories. This gave us a head start on the kind of vulnerability that usually takes months to develop in new relationships. Do you think other people would believe this story if we told them? Zoe asked one evening as we lay on her couch, her head on my shoulder while we watched rain streak her windows. Probably not, I said, running my fingers through her hair. It sounds impossible even to me, and I lived it. Are you okay with that? With having something this significant that we can't really share with anyone else? I considered the question seriously. The rational part of me had wondered the same thing. How do you explain to friends and family that you fell in love with someone before you met them? That your relationship was built on shared dreams that defied every law of logic and probability? But lying there with her warm weight against me, listening to her breathe, I realized it didn't matter what others thought. This was our story, our miracle. The fact that it sounded impossible to everyone else didn't make it less real. I'm okay with it, I said finally. Some things are too precious to need external validation. She tilted her head up to look at me. Even if people think we're moving too fast? We've only known each other a month, but we're already talking about moving in together. We've known each other for 4 months, I corrected gently. The dreams count. They were real experiences, even if they happened in sleep. And besides, when you know, you know. Do you know? She asked quietly. I leaned down to kiss her forehead. I know I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I know I want to build something real and lasting with you. I know that what we have is once in a lifetime, and I'm not going to waste it worrying about what other people think about our timeline. Her smile was radiant. Good, because I feel exactly the same way. As winter settled over New York, our relationship deepened and solidified. We developed routines and inside jokes, learned each other's quirks and preferences. Zoe was messier than I'd expected, but also more thoughtful. She left art books scattered around her apartment but always remembered exactly how I liked my tea. She sang off-key in the shower but had an uncanny ability to sense when I was having a difficult day, even when I tried to hide it. I discovered that she was funnier than the dreams had captured, with a dry wit that caught me off guard and made me laugh until my sides ached. She was also more driven than I'd realized, passionate about her research in ways that were inspiring to watch. When she talked about art history, her whole face came alive and I could listen to her for hours. The dreams had shown me her kindness and intelligence, but they hadn't captured her ambition or her fierce loyalty to the people she cared about. They hadn't shown me how she looked in the early morning light streaming through her bedroom windows, or the face she made when she was concentrating on writing, or the way she danced around her kitchen while cooking dinner. Every day brought new discoveries, new reasons to fall deeper in love with the woman who had haunted my sleep for months. But perhaps the most wonderful thing was how naturally it all unfolded. Despite the supernatural beginning to our relationship, everything that followed felt organic and right. By spring, we were living together in a new apartment that was ours rather than hers or mine. By summer, we were talking about marriage with the same certainty we'd felt about everything else in our relationship. When you've been brought together by shared dreams and impossible synchronicities, traditional timelines seem less important than following your heart. Do you ever miss them? Zoe asked one night as we sat on our fire escape, watching the city sparkle below us. The dreams, I mean. I thought about it seriously before answering. Sometimes. They were beautiful and they brought us together. But I don't miss them the way I thought I might. Because this is better? Because this is real, I said, taking her hand. The dreams were perfect, but they were also limited. They couldn't capture how you snort when you laugh really hard, or how you get grumpy when you're hungry, or how you cry during commercials with animals in them. She laughed and squeezed my fingers. Those don't sound like selling points. They're everything, I said seriously. They're the real you, not just the dreamed version. And the real you is infinitely more wonderful than even my subconscious could have imagined.